Normally, I refrain from talking about issues related to guns and mass shootings because I do not really have an answer, nor have fully developed my views on these issues, but I have recently been inspired. I watched a couple of Beau of the Fifth Column's videos, and one of them brought up an interesting study by the Violence Project. The Violence Project is a nonpartisan think tank funded by the National Institute of Justice, dedicated to reducing violence in society and improving related policy and practice through research and analysis. What is interesting about this project is that they have compiled a mass shooter database from 1966 to 2018. They have coded over 70 individual level psychosocial life history variables to include mental health history, trauma, interest in past shootings, and situational triggers. They examine the community level socio-ecological factors of where the mass shootings took place. These factors include crime rates, measures of social inequality, community mobility, availability of mental health resources, and the prevalence of guns in households. They conducted in-depth life history interviews with living mass shooters who are currently incarcerated and follow-up interviews with key stakeholders like family members, first responders, survivors, and experts in the communities where the shootings took place. All work is subjected to the ethical protocols of the Institutional Review Board at Hamline University and a commitment to no notoriety for mass shooters. Part 1. Why should we be worried about mass shootings? Let's get this out of the way first. Mass shootings only make up about 1% of all firearm homicides in the United States. According to Gun Violence Archive, there have been 34,553 incidents of gun violence in 2019, 9,143 deaths with 18,166 injuries. America does not just have a mass shooting problem, but multiple problems with gun violence. In context, 257 people died in mass shootings this year alone. That does not seem like it's something we should focus on because of all the other categories that have higher deaths attributed to them, like suicide. But mass shootings are a separate event altogether. It is the reasons behind the shooter's motives that make this a problem, with the added effect on not only the victims and their families, but also the general feeling of safety in our society. Not being worried about mass shootings because it is a smaller number is like not being worried about the 31,000 deaths from prostate cancer because lung cancer kills 1.76 million. They both fall under the deaths from cancer, but are separate issues that can be solved by isolating them. I'm not going to be talking about gun violence in general, though. I am specifically speaking about mass shootings. In order to reduce the overall concept of gun violence, we should break it down into rational parts so that we can see specific problems and offer specific solutions. Obviously, some of the solutions to preventing mass shootings could also prevent deaths in other categories, but we should be looking at each issue separately. So if only 257 people have died in mass shootings this year, why should we care? Overall, we should care because those 257 lives that were lost to no fault of their own. They just happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. As these shootings increase in prevalence, people within our society are going to be more fearful of being in public places. Trust between strangers and individuals will be weakened. If trust in a society begins to break, then the society itself begins to fall apart. There is no reason for people to want to cooperate if they fear for their lives due to random acts of violence whenever they leave their house. Also, if you haven't noticed, but our economy may be headed towards a recession due to the main yield curve inverting. This usually signals that a recession is on its way. At a time in which Republicans have a better view of the security of our economy, which just so happens to spike right when Trump was elected, which makes you wonder what the real reason is, but people generally will take more risks. However, if we hit a recession and these individuals lose their jobs and assets, we could see an increase in gun-related deaths and in mass shootings. Someone going off the deep end because they lost everything is not a very far-fetched idea. Couple that with the increase of mass shootings in general, a recession could have other impacts on our society beyond economic ones. Part 2. What is a mass shooting? According to the Violence Project, the term mass shooting does not have a universally accepted definition. This leads to problems with the data and gives rise to talking points from the right like, why are gang shootings not considered in mass shooting numbers? Well, I will tell you why. Gang violence is not the same as mass shooting violence. What causes one is completely separate than the other. This talking point is only meant to take the light off the majority of these shootings are committed by white males and try to place some of that blame onto another race in order to make it seem like white males are no more violent. The problem is I don't see any black people shooting up public spaces with tons of innocent people because women are not having sex with them or they feel that they're being replaced in America. The Violence Project uses the Congressional Research Service's definition of mass shooting, a multiple homicide incident in which 4 or more victims are murdered with firearms, not including the offenders, within one event, and at least some of the murders occurred in a public location or locations in close geographical proximity, like a workplace, school, restaurant, or other public settings. And the murderers are not only attributed to any other underlying criminal activity or commonplace circumstance, armed robbery, criminal competition, insurance fraud, argument, or a romantic triangle. Other agencies in America, like the FBI, do not track these events in particular. They label them under the term active shooter and lump all of them together. The CDC isn't even allowed to study gun violence at all per the Dickey Amendment. It states none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control. It was passed with the lobby efforts of, yep, you guessed it, the NRA. If any of the CDC's research were used to promote or advocate for gun control, then their funding would be severely hampered because of this. Part 3. The Violence Project's Findings. From all the data the Violence Project has collected, they have come up with 4 things that the vast majority of mass shooters have in common. Let's go through them one by one. 1. The vast majority of them have experienced early childhood trauma and experience. According to the project, the nature of their exposure included parental suicide, physical or sexual abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and or severe bullying. The trauma was often a precursor to mental health concerns, including depression, anxiety, thought disorders, or suicidality. This point is extremely important to many policy ideas on the left in particular. From my experience, the right offers policy and solutions as a reaction, and the left offers policy and solutions to reduce the events from happening in the first place. For example, the right wants the ability to carry a firearm at all times. This allows them to react to a situation. The left wants gun-free zones and hopes it'll deter people because seeing a weapon would automatically cause alarm and that it would prevent accidental discharges. While this reaction versus prevention doesn't hold true in all cases, generally speaking, it does seem this way. 2. Every mass shooter studied had reached an identifiable crisis point in the weeks or months leading up to the shooting. The Violence Project outlines that they often had become angry and despondent because of a specific grievance. For workplace shooters, a change in job status was frequently the trigger. For shooters in other contexts, relationship rejection or loss often played a role. Such crises were in many cases communicated to others through a marked change in behavior, an expression of suicidal thoughts or plans, or specific threats of violence. 3. Most of the shooters had studied the action of other shooters and sought validation for their motives. The Violence Project states that people in crisis have always existed, but in the age of 24-hour rolling news and social media, there are scripts to follow that promise notoriety and death. Societal fear and fascination with mass shootings partly drives the motivation to commit them. Hence, as we have seen in the last week, mass shootings tend to come in clusters. They are socially contagious. Perpetrators study other perpetrators and model their acts after previous shootings. Many are radicalized online in their search for validation from others that their will to murder is justified. 4. The shooters all have had the means to carry out their plans. According to the Violence Project, once someone decides life is no longer worth living and that murdering others would be a proper revenge, only means an opportunity stand in the way of another mass shooting. Is an appropriate shooting site accessible? Can the would-be shooter obtain firearms? In 80% of school shootings, perpetrators got their weapons from family members. According to our data, workplace shooters tended to use handguns they legally owned. Other public shooters were more than likely to acquire them illegally. Part 4. What can we do? Point 1 is about early childhood trauma. While you cannot prevent early childhood trauma 100%, nor should you even expect to eliminate it, some solutions can be offered. The right would offer up the idea of personal responsibility and not playing the victim, that we shouldn't be shackled to our past experiences and we should move past them in order to grow. They would state that people could either be victims or own their past and use it to become better versions of themselves. Sure, we can have the general societal conception that we are masters of our own ship, but this also denies the scientific evidence that traumatic experiences can change the physical and chemical makeup of the brain. These changes will undoubtedly cause a change in the person. Not a change that one can simply just snap their fingers and think it away, but a change at the core of what it is to be that person. The left proposes that we make changes in the environment in order to foster better outcomes, a more deterministic approach. If poverty is a factor that increases the likelihood that children experience early childhood trauma, then we should do as much as we can to eliminate or at least mitigate the negative aspects of poverty. That is why we fall more onto the side of using the collective or the government to help. The left generally supports policies that would help eliminate the known factors that lead parents to neglect their children, produce unneeded anxiety and stress, or access to health care. However, there is so much that we can do collectively without destroying the individual's freedom. My solution is to take a blended approach. We do both things. We teach our children that they can be captains of their own ships. We produce a culture that teaches resilience and problem solving. We teach them the power of being an individual. However, at the same time, we chase larger policies that create better environments for those individuals to grow and prosper. We advocate for the cultivation of the individual and the collective. Point 2 revolves around the idea of a moment in someone's life that is the catalyst to the mass shooting. Most shooters just don't randomly decide to go and commit their act of violence on a whim. They're usually planned out in order to convey the biggest message and inflict the most harm as possible. They usually show signs of this crisis affecting them in some way beforehand. This point actually spawned my idea for this video in the first place. See, I plan on going over this in much detail in a later series of videos meant to help put a spotlight on crisis intervention and education. We as a society fail at being able to spot these events and to respond to them effectively. Being in the military, we've had our own issues at spotting these events as well. This is something I can believe that we can do individually and as a society that will have a measured impact on the amount of mass shootings. So I will take this subject seriously and give it all the attention it needs. Point 3 is also another huge thing we can actually do something about: notoriety in the projection of their crimes. See, mass shootings are socially contagious. This means that one successful one can inspire another shooter to implement their plan. They see the attention and the death toll that one event is getting and they want it. They study other shooters and their actions. They want to emulate the things they did right and avoid the things they did wrong. Mass shootings are a part of the spectacle of society. It's a way for people who are disassociated with society to actually affect it in some capacity. They create an event in the mundaneness of the world and everyday life. They interrupt society and all focus is on them. They become the spectacle that deserves attention and respect. They feed off the reactions to their actions. It's at this moment in time they feel in control, that they have power. We must first have a media blackout of all things relating to mass shootings. We need to, as a nation, set guidelines on how these events will be reported on and handled by the media. We should only report that an event is taking place, but not give any real details to that event. We should never ever promote the shooter's identity nor their face on media. We should give these individuals no attention whatsoever. We should not cover the event for weeks to spark a national conversation or to drive up viewership in the name of making money. Mass shootings should be revealed to the public in the most general sense. We should refer to the shooters by the name of the place in which the event took place, and we should use the victims' names as much as possible. For example, let's take a look at this Vox article on the Walmart shooting in El Paso, Texas. The first paragraph is all the public needs to know. No one needs to know how old the suspect is. No one needs to know the reason for the attack, unless it was like an invading foreign army. And no one needs to know that there was a manifesto. The Vox article then identifies the shooter and a bunch of personal information about him. They also report on specifics about the time and place and what people were doing, as if they're trying to let other shooters know that this is a good time to commit an act. All this other information should be collected by the police and kept hidden until the trial and only given to people who are using it for research. Beyond that, the general population doesn't need to know anything else. All we do is help propagate and advertise for the shooter's agenda. They get free coverage to have their actions inspire others to do the same. I don't care if news organizations lose money because of this. Money isn't worth the lives of innocent people, ever. I will say this one more time. We need complete media blackouts when it comes to mass shootings, period. Point 4 covers an incredibly complex area, access to the means to carry out their plans. This not only has to deal with gun control, but how we design and implement security for our public spaces. I'm not going to dive deep into this because it's already being debated in our public discourse. However, I have been dwindling on something. It's the concept of personal responsibility. This is something the right loves to throw in the face of lefties like myself, that we don't accept personal responsibility. However, if one allows their teenage son to have access to their firearms and he uses them to kill a group of people, why is the gun owner left off the hook? There is always a ton of pushback on this idea, and personally, I don't know why. We should want to know where our firearms are at all times. We should want to know that they are safely stored or in the hands of somebody who will not use them in nefarious ways. We should treat guns like highly valuable personal objects. You wouldn't just let anyone have access to your most prized personal valuables, would you? Or what about nude photos of your significant other? This is how we should view and treat our firearms. Part 5. What am I going to do to help deter mass shootings? I want to create a video series about how we as a society can be better at identifying and preventing the events that lead people to commit mass shootings. I want to cover how we teach coping mechanisms and skills so that people have tools in their disposal to deal with the difficulties of life. We have failed somewhere at instilling resiliency in much of our youth, most importantly, white males. If I can prevent at least one mass shooting by this information, then I have done something. That's all I want. If anyone listening to this is a subject matter expert in a field that could assist me, I would love to hear your thoughts and have you speak on my channel about it. I do not know everything and would love to have some differing perspectives on this subject. Thanks for listening, my fellow philosophers, and I hope to see you all very soon. If you liked my video, please like, share, and